So it looks like in order to make a bobblehead, you need three things. You need a spring, you need a head, and you need a body. We already have the spring taken care of, so let's look at the head. Right now I have a scan of me made using an XBox Kinect and some software, and I'm going to use this as the head of my own bobblehead. But before we can put it on and get it printed out, I'm going to have to do some cleanup. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to chop myself off at the neck, because I really do not need anything below my neck. This is just going to be the head. I'm not going to use the body for anything. So I'm going to take a plain cut, and I am just going to cut everything off from the neck down. That looks good. So boom. So now that's cut. I have just the head that I'm going to work with. The next thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to remove some more of the neck. So the way that the bobblehead sits, I don't want it to look like it's just a spring going through my neck. I want the head to sink a little bit lower in the shoulders. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to remove some of the neck in this area. So I can do that by going to select, and then I can just slice away an area that I want. So if I cut something like, let's make it a little bit more than that. So if I do that, that'll cut away a lot of the bulk of the neck. So I can just click delete, and boom, it's gone. But now there's just this hole in my head. What am I going to do about that? Well, luckily, Meshmixer has an option to make an object solid. So if you go to edit, you can do make solid, and this is going to run, and what it's going to do is it's going to fill in that hollow area and fill in the bottom. Look at that. That looks great. I'm going to adjust the settings just a little bit. I'm going to actually make it a little bit more accurate. So I'm going to increase that, increase the density and updates. There we go. So the bottom's filled. That's good. One of the last things I'm going to do to clean up this model is in the top of my head, the scanner didn't quite fill in everything. So I'm actually going to use some sculpting tools, and I'm going to fix that. So if you go to Bubble Smooth, you can actually get in here, and it's going to smooth out wherever this brush shows. So here I'm just going to kind of fill in this area and clean up the hair a little bit so that it looks a little more natural. So there we go, that looks good. So with my scan cleaned up, now it's time to put a hole in my head. So in order to cut the hole in my head, I'm first going to design a shape of the hole that I want to cut. So I want to make sure that the shape is the right size for the spring. And I'm going to do this using a program called Design Spark Mechanical. It's made by a company called SpaceClaim, and it's a really nice free computer-aided design program. It has a lot of amazing features, and it's really intuitive to use. So in order to design the shape that I'm going to subtract out of my head, I'm going to first click on a circle, and I'm going to draw a circle. And I know I want that to be 15 millimeters in diameter. And what you can do after you draw a shape is you can just click it, and you can extrude it. So I want this to be 12 millimeters high, and look at that. It just draws the shape right there. Then from that, I'm going to draw another shape, and this is going to be where the spring actually rests. And you can see that in a second. But I know that the spring, when I measure it, is 7.75 millimeters in diameter. So I'm going to make that circle, and I'm also going to extrude that up another 8 millimeters. So this is now the plug, the shape that I'm going to subtract out of my head. The head is going to be up here, and then this is the size of the spring, and then this area will be cut away so that the spring has some way to move so the head can bobble. So I'm going to export this as an STL, and I'll meet you back in Meshmixer. So before we import the plug and cut away that shape, we're going to have to scale down my head, because right now this is a full-size scan of my face, so we're going to have to scale that down. But luckily, Meshmixer can do that pretty simply. As once this object is selected, you can go to Units and Dimensions, and it will show the dimensions for each of the axes right here. And I know that After experimenting and playing around with some calipers to see what I want my head to be about 62 millimeters high. So I'm just going to click and drag and bring that down to about 62. It doesn't have to be perfect. There we go, 62.5. That'll be great. So now we have the scan of my head that's been cleaned up and made ready for a bobblehead. And it's now scaled to the correct scale that I want. So now we can import the peg that I designed in Design Spark Mechanical. So now I'm going to import it, and it's asking me if I want to shift its position. Yes, I want it to get closer. And now you can see that I have my head, and we have the plug here. So now I'm going to click on the plug, and I'm going to transform it, which just means that I can move it around. And I want to make it so that's about, with the object browser, about 0 here, and I'm going to move it up. And we'll see how this looks. So right now I'm going to move it back a little bit so that it's in the middle of the hole, and I want this to go up so that it's barely sticking out of the bottom. There we go. That looks like it's about position. So right now I have just moved that plug inside my head. Next, we're going to do what's called a Boolean difference. I'm going to tell Meshmixer to take the shape of my head and subtract out anywhere that the plug is. So you can do that by selecting the object that you want to remain, and then Control-Shift the object you want to delete, and it will bring up this option where you can do a Boolean difference. So I'm going to select that, and now you can look at it. And you can see that it took that plug and it cut out the shape of the plug in my head. If I turn on the wireframe, you can definitely see that this plug is missing. And this is going to be great because this will allow the spring to slide up in this cavity, and then this larger cavity is going to allow the head to bobble. So now that the head is complete, this is going to be ready to print. I can turn my focus onto the body. One last thing before I actually go to 3D print this. You have to be aware with 3D printing of any overhangs. Any place like my ears or the inside of the plug right here, any place that doesn't have any supports naturally by the object is going to need supports when printing. And while Slicer supports are okay, and Meshmixer supports are also pretty good, I want to minimize the amount of supports I need for this. And Meshmixer has a great tool called orientation. And what it's going to do is it's going to try to rotate the object and optimize the amount of supports needed. It's trying to remove as many supports as possible. So if I click orientation, it's going to flip it around and find the most optimal layouts. And what it looks like is it wants to print it upside down, starting with my hair. So if we zoom out, this is how it would be printed, with my head on the bottom and then printed up layer by layer towards the top. And this is to reduce the amount of support material needed. So I'm going to play around with this a little bit, kind of tweak it myself, because I don't want it starting here. I kind of want to start in this hair area, just because it'll be easier to hide any blemishes here. So I'm going to rotate that around before I actually export this file to my 3D printer. But that is the last step. Now we can focus on the body. So this is the model I'll be using for the body. I don't have a good full body scan of myself, and since this is just a prototype, it doesn't really matter. So I went to Thingiverse and I found this model, and it looks really nice. So the first thing I'm going to do with this, there's not going to be too many tweaks, but I need to scale it down first. And I also figured that with the size of my head being 62 millimeters, I want the body to not be quite in proportion as the head. A bobblehead always needs a much larger head than the body. So with playing around with calipers and scaling, I found that I want my prototype body to be about 105 millimeters in height. So I'm just going to shrink this down until I get to about 105 millimeters. 150, it's going to go back to there, and then I can adjust the scaling here. So 105. Perfect. So now that this is 105 millimeters tall, we can start work on the next step. And so the next stage is I'm going to cut off this head. I want to use the same kind of technique that I used for the head. I'm going to actually cut a hole into the body for the spring to rest, rather than wrapping the spring around the post. So I'm going to do the same kind of thing that I did with my head. I'm going to take a plane. I'm going to tell it to remove anything lower than this. So swipe it down, and you can see that it's going to cut off that neck portion, and that'll be great. So accept that and cut it, and that'll be good. Next stage is to import the plug that I designed in Design Spark, and I'm also going to do a Boolean subtract and cut a hole here. Okay, so I have the plug and I have the body. Before I do the Boolean difference, I have to do some cleanup on the body first. Right now, Meshmixer is giving a few errors. You can see these red dots. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to make this solid as well. And I'm going to adjust the parameters so it looks a little better. Okay, so I have made this solid. Meshmixer now thinks that this is completely solid. And now I should be able to cut out the plug from the body. So I'm going to select the plug. I'm going to bring it down. And I kind of want it to cut a little bit into the body so that the spring has some place to rest. So you can see the plug will cut into the neck here, and that'll be fine. So I'm going to select the body, select the plug, and subtract out the plug. And look at that, there's a perfect hole in the center. If I turn on wireframe, you can see that the hole extends into the neck, and this will be a perfect resting point for the bobblehead itself. So I'm going to accept, then I'm going to export this as an STL file, and we can get to printing the bobblehead. So here is the bobblehead. I just imported the head that we cleaned up before, and I put it over the body. And so this is what the final product is going to look like. It's going to have my head, there's going to be the spring inside of it, and the spring is going to go into the body, and hopefully this will turn out pretty well when I 3D print this. So it's always a good idea to double check the scaling before you start printing, because it's a lot easier to make a change now than it is to wait for the print to finish and then you decide you want to change something. So always double check your work. I think this looks pretty good for a first prototype. So I'm going to go ahead and slice it, and I'm going to print it out, and I will see you guys when the print is finished.
Okay, after a little bit of adjustments, we have a bobblehead.
Thank you for watching Hoffman Engineering.